Hi, and welcome to Next Generation Finance, a new podcast from SEB where we explore the world of sustainable finance, its history, forecasts for the future, and the latest developments in the market. My name is Lina Apsheva. I'm a sustainable finance analyst at SEB, and today I am joined by two of my colleagues, Anne Kästner, who is a sustainable finance specialist, and Jessica Mattsson, who is an analyst in climate and sustainable finance team here at SEB. And we will be talking about the Impact Metric tool, a tool that was developed by SEB with the purpose of offering investors an opportunity to measure the sustainability of listed companies in their portfolios. Hi Anne, hi Jessica, I'm so excited to have you here today. So why don't we start with you telling us how long have you been involved with this project?
Thanks, Lina. Thanks for having us. We're so excited to be here. So I have been working with the Impact Metric tool for 2.5 years now. It's been a long, wild ride so far.
Yeah, and I got involved a bit later, so I've been working for around 1.5 years now.
All right, so I guess you know a pretty good deal about the tool by now, and hope you can share a little bit with us. So let's just dive right in. What is the IMT?
Well, so let's start with me, Anne. Lina, I think you really explained what it was already in the introduction. It's a portfolio tool, and we use it to analyze portfolios from a sustainability perspective. So if you break it down to like the easiest way to say it, it's we measure the sustainability of investment portfolios. And let's say you have 2 companies only in your portfolio. You could easily do that manually, right? You're reading the sustainability reports, you're looking at the companies, you kind of get an idea on how sustainable they are. But if you have 2,000 companies in your portfolio, that actually becomes a long and tedious and very inefficient process, if you can say so. So what we do then is that we automate that process and we analyze portfolios through a program and we gather data from all kinds of different sources.
And another part is also that we try to use as many different metrics or aspects of sustainability as we can. So it's not like we put a rating on the portfolio, but instead we try to show many diverse aspects of sustainability, like we both show carbon intensity, gender equality, climate risks, and many other metrics as well.
I see. That's really cool. So how did the idea of having this kind of tool come about? How was it developed?
There were actually 2 reasons. So when we started developing the Impact Metric tool, which was actually before both of us started at SEB, it was a team who was mostly catering towards institutional investors, so say large pension funds. And there was more and more this need of investors to understand the sustainability performance of their portfolios, both from a risk and an opportunity perspective. So regulators and end clients, individuals like you and me, they were asking after sustainability criteria for portfolios, and investors needed to understand those criteria better. And there weren't really so many of those tools out there at the time. So that was one part, this gap in the market that we saw. And then the other part was that the team that we were working in then was actually developing a sustainability fund, an impact fund. And they wanted to have an own tool to be able to measure the impact. So what are they doing with the investments that they're actually having in that fund? So these were the two things why we started the Impact Metric tool.
And you've kind of touched on this a little bit in your answer, but could we maybe go a little bit deeper into who exactly is the tool for? Is it just specifically for investors? Can companies use it as well? Is it for finance professionals?
Yeah, so the starting point and the way we're using it right now is that it's for institutional investors, so say pension funds. But the vision and long-term goal is to make it available for more people to use it, and for example for other divisions of the bank to use it for their clients, so say retail investors or similar.
Exactly, and their SEB is doing quite a big push right now to make more sustainability data available for retail clients, so individuals like you and me, available to so that we can actually look at data and understand that in our own decision making. just as investors need it in their decision making.
We know that the tool is for measuring the kind of sustainability of portfolios, but how exactly do you do that and how does it work? I really want to get into the nitty-gritty here.
Maybe we can divide it into two parts. So one thing is that we try to produce estimations of sustainability data. So a big problem within sustainability data is that there is a lack of data out there. So say that you have, for example, a small Chinese company that you want to know the gender equality of. That data wouldn't be available for you. So one thing that we do with the impact metric tool is that we estimate that data. So that's one part. And the second part is that we try to aggregate the data that's out there and make it sort of easier to understand for the investors. So we want to include it in advisory to help investors to interpret the data and also make investment decisions on that data. Another thing is that we also want to help investors understand not the part of sustainability that they already know today, but also what societal challenges they are facing that they might not be that aware of today. So to also spread knowledge about sustainability.
So in short, we're using both estimated data. For example, you have a part of your portfolio in small or mid-cap China companies you don't know anything about, but you still need to get a feeling for your entire portfolio. So you use estimations and reported data together. And what you can do with the tool then is that you get a view of your portfolio. So you get the gender equality of your portfolio. You can compare that to a benchmark, an index, for example, or another portfolio, for example, of your competitor, or if you have two portfolios on your own. So it's this comparability. You can use it for reporting. So you write, for example, in your annual reports, oh, this is the CO2 intensity, this is the impact that we have, for example, on the Sustainable Development Goals. So that is another part. And then the last part is that we can also use it to optimize portfolios. And that comes back to the advisory part that Jessica has been talking about. So we are going out to our clients and they, for example, have a quite high CO2 intensity. And they want to know, okay, how can I decrease that CO2 intensity? Because that's actually what climate change mitigation is all about, right? Or it's a part of climate change mitigation, let's put it that way. And then we can show them how they would need to change their portfolio in order to decrease their climate change impact. So this is a big part of what we're doing.
That sounds like it adds a whole other layer to kind of the sustainability aspects of conducting business and investing as well. But why is it necessary for investors to use these kind of tools? And why is it important to look into this kind of data?
From my point of view, I would always start with the assumption that investors want to invest sustainably, but they need to know how they can do that. What you cannot measure, you cannot manage. So in that way, sustainability data is so incredibly important, and I think it will have a really, really important role now during the next decade. How do you know if you make a positive impact, for example, on the Sustainable Development Goals? How do you know that your investments are driving the sustainability transformation if you cannot measure it? If you do not have the proper tools, the right KPIs, you will not drive the sustainability transformation where you need to go, more or less. And the impact metric tool is one of many ways of how to measure these kind of sustainability metrics. And it's not only investors. We can also look to corporates who need to know how they look like themselves, who need to understand their supply chain, who need to set KPIs. And for all of that, they need sustainability data. And the same for banks when we're looking at our lending. So in the end, I guess all of the tools that are making data more available, more accessible, and more understandable is incredibly important, at least from our point of view. Sustainability data is the big thing right now.
And just also on the same topic, I think also transparency is extremely important. So if me as a private individual, for example, want to be sustainable, then I need to know this data, either from company reporting or from a tool like Impact Metric tool. And on that same topic as well, the comparability, to be able to compare two companies or two portfolio with each other and know on several different metrics how they look. I think that's super important.
All right, thank you for explaining that. And both of you have touched upon this topic of metrics, and you use the word metrics quite a lot. But what do you mean when you say metrics, and what kind of metrics are you using when measuring sustainability in these portfolios?
When we say metrics, we mean just the many different ways that we can define sustainability of a portfolio. And in the impact metric tool, we try to do that in different ways. So first, we want to look at the how. So how does the company operate? Like, for example, their carbon intensity or gender equality, as we've been talking about. But we also want to look at the what. So what does the company do? Is it an oil company, or is it a wind farm company, for example? But then over time, we've also added different regulatory measures, how a portfolio is related to a specific regulation, but also how it's related to risks, so climate risks, for example. So I would say that's what we mean when we talk about metrics, all of those different things.
And that gives you like a whole range of things that we're measuring. And just as Jessica said in the beginning, we're not aggregating that or summarizing that in one score, but we have these different aspects that we're showing to our clients. And the idea behind is that on one hand, we want to show the metrics, so carbon intensity, and the ones that are quite established today already, where we have the data, the metrics that many regulators are asking for. And then on the other hand, we also try to be on the forefront, developing new ideas and trying to find new ways of how to measure sustainability. And one example for that would be that we have done a cooperation now with the Swedish Royal Academy of Sciences, where we have been looking at the impact of certain industries on the Sustainable Development Goals. So are they positively or negatively impacting the 17 Sustainable Development Goals with the activities that they're doing, let's say steel production? And there exists a lot of research out there on what the impact of the steel industry is, but that wasn't really aggregated before. So what we have done together with the Royal Swedish Academy was to aggregate that and to translate it in order for investors to be able to use that kind of data and get a scientific understanding of their impact of their portfolio.
I see. And am I correct to assume that the data that you're using, you're receiving from data suppliers? You're not looking for it yourself. So how does that process work?
So we're buying data from different kind of data suppliers, and then we do the estimations in-house. So we're getting loads of different data, and that could be data that comes directly from the company. That could also be some kind of overlay like this, mapping the SDGs to the industries that we have done ourselves. So it's loads of different data points that we're using, and then that would then be aggregated together into the portfolio analysis.
Could you maybe, just one more question on this topic, could you maybe provide some specific examples of metrics that you're using? You already said emission intensity. Is there any other specific examples that you could perhaps provide to paint a picture of how exactly the tool works?
Yeah, so for example, we also look at waste intensity and water intensity, which similar to emission intensity is like how much the portfolio is emitting, how much waste and how much water it's using per the total revenues that they have. But then also
the EU taxonomy, I guess. Yeah, so that is more on the regulatory side. The EU has done this classification system on what is called sustainable and what's not. And you can measure portfolios with the help of that definition. And that is something that we have been doing for 2 years now. And then, of course, climate risk. This is something that we have been talking about a lot in the sustainable finance world, at least. And we are trying to measure that and trying to look at different scenarios on how the climate will change over the next years and what that will do with portfolios.
I will not go into that. It seems like a topic for a whole other episode, but it's definitely a very interesting one. I'll keep it in mind. But moving on, I'm curious to know, what are your plans for the future with the IMT?
we're always trying to develop the tool further, of course. And right now we're working on developing a biodiversity metric for impact metric tool. So we want to help investors understand how their portfolio is related to biodiversity risks. And this is a topic that's not very well understood by investors at this time. And we want to try to help to gather the data that is out there and also create more knowledge about biodiversity to investors.
And that feels kind of like the perfect description of what the impact metric tool is doing. It's not only about creating our own data or not only about gathering data that's out there, but it's this mix together. So now everybody has been talking about climate risk and the tragedy of the horizon. So investors investing more short term than what the climate change impacts will be. But I guess we all understand that climate is this huge issue and this huge challenge. But now people are slowly understanding that there's biodiversity as well. There is the loss of habitats and deforestation and so on. And you still do not have a real way to measure it, to include it in portfolios. And we will want to help investors to actually understand that societal challenge as well, because as we come back to why it is important to do it, it's only if you can measure it, you can actually regulate your exposure towards it, and you can actually manage your biodiversity risk.
And biodiversity is certainly very hot topic right now within the world of sustainable finance. It's been kind of in the shadow of the emissions and the carbon footprint conversation, but now it's definitely coming to the forefront, which is extremely important. But it is, like you said, a complicated topic to look at. But how do you view biodiversity, and how do you define it in the context of this tool?
Like we said, this is very much under development, but how we will try to look at it is both the impact that the companies or in the portfolio have on biodiversity, but also the dependency that they have. So, for example, an agriculture company will be very dependent on biodiversity loss not being more severe than it is today.
Yeah, so for example, it will be very dependent on loads of different ecosystem services, on the soil that it's using for its agriculture activities, on the water and so on. So we will try and structure it into those two parts. The impact part, of course, is easier, right? You can measure deforestation, for example, but the dependency part will be so much harder. And the thing is then, will you translate it into financial risks? That much will you lose, or this is how much you will lose in terms of dollars or not. We don't really know yet. So we're still in the early phases of the development, but we think that it doesn't really matter how our metric will look like in the end. As soon as we get these conversations started and get these investors to start thinking about biodiversity risk more, that will then help us to develop the tool further in discussions with them, and that will also start this whole thought process a little bit more in the industry. So we're very excited about that.
And also just getting the conversation started also usually points to the place where we lack data. So we're hoping also that if we can do something at least, then maybe it could be improved in the future if, for example, companies start reporting more on the biodiversity.
And maybe there we can also point out that we have been talking a lot about the lack of data now in the last 20 minutes. But one thing that we also see is that the data quality and also the coverage is expanding and improving immensely during the last years. Not only because investors, but also because companies and regulators are really understanding the importance of data more and more. There are more regulations in place. Investors are requiring more data from companies. So this is also something that's moving very fast, which is also why it's super interesting to work in this area.
Oh, thank you so much, Anna and Jessica, for coming today and sharing with me and our listeners about the IMT, the Impact Metric Tool. I thought it was very interesting to learn more about it. And I do want to ask you one more bonus question, just not about IMT specifically, but your personal kind of opinion and maybe advice that you could give to finance professionals and just professionals in other fields who perhaps also want to look into ways of incorporating sustainability into their operations and business in the way that you've incorporated into portfolio analysis. Is there anything that you'd like to share with them?
So we've been talking about this a lot, but of course we're data people. So I would say to start measuring and start putting goals on sustainability as well. In the same way as we measure and put goals on financial metrics, we also need to do that for sustainability metrics.
No, I totally agree with Jessica. When you start to think not only about qualitative storylines about how well you're doing when it comes to sustainability, but you also start to measure in terms of KPIs, I strongly believe that the right KPIs will improve your sustainability performance.
And KPIs are, of course, key performance indicators. Thank you so much, both, again. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining and tuning into this episode. As always, you can reach us at nextgenfin@seb.se, and feel free to send any questions or suggestions for topics for future episodes. Stay in touch. Bye.